Welcome back to the show. Wendy Renee here. I'm so excited to have Dr. Ryan Lee on our show. I have been very fortunate to have found him through YouTube, through the ExJw community. It is extremely important to talk about mental health. And I wanted to bring on Dr. Ryan Lee. Not only is he a PSYD, but Ryan is also an ExJw. And if anybody understands what it is that those who encounter narcissistic abuse and abuse at the hands of high control religion, he does. More importantly, he's also here to help and offer some wisdom. So we're really thankful to have him here. Before we get into it, thank you so much for subscribing. We just hit 1,000 subscribers. How cool is that? Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and also hit that little bell at the top, because that lets you know whenever I post something, you'll be the first to know. And if you're interested, we have a little community over here on TikTok. So feel free to go and hang out with us in the comments over there.
Once you get to a point where you recognize this guilt is just bad programming, it's not something that's truly me, then you get into the practice of going, oh, look at that. My mind is trying to make me feel guilty right now. I'm going to bring it back to where I want it, and it gives you a little bit of agency in the process and creates a little space. And that space creates the opportunity for you to make different decisions about how you want to approach it. And it's really, it's beautiful. You don't have to do it a ton. You can do it, if you do it every day for 10 minutes in the morning for 2 weeks, I can almost be certain that you'll notice a distinct difference. Now, the practice itself may not be anything magical or spectacular, but you start noticing through the rest of your day, things that would normally knock you off your center don't anymore. You're able to think a little bit more clearly. You're able to make more decisions that are sort of in line with what you really want. And then I'll add one more thing that I find really useful, and I think a lot of other witnesses do too, is I make the focus of my meditation what I'm feeling. And we carry so much. Anxiety is a big one for ExJw's witnesses, and for most people, it's like this energy that sits in their solar plexus, and it's kind of clenched. It's like a fist in their chest, and it acts up. And we get caught up in making choices based on that feeling. And so, as a meditative practice, I sit with that feeling. What that means is I focus on my intention on just feeling that feeling, not trying to figure it out, not trying to fix it, not trying to change it or do anything to it or try to distract myself from it, but just simply sitting in the actual, let's say, physical feeling of it and just staying with it. And what people find, or what I found and other people I know, is that can go in a lot of different ways. Sometimes you discover that anxiety is trying to tell you something. Sometimes it just dissipates on its own. Sometimes it transforms and shapes into something else. And I've always had a certain amount of anxiety, and through this process, I'm at a point now, even as we're talking right now, I can feel that little energy in my chest, but it's changed to the point that anxiety doesn't even word for it anymore. I've almost made friends with it, and it's still there, and it's still sometimes lets me know that I'm acting in some way that's out of alignment for me. But it's almost, I almost have like a friendly relationship with it now, and it doesn't get in my way or prevent me from being able to be present or connect with people.
I love that you said recognizing it. And I've been learning about that with regard to intrusive thoughts, fears that creep in. Like my son is afraid of the dark, and we had a long talk last night about, those fears are going to come in. Like, we can't control our thoughts. We can control our reaction to them. And when it comes to our relationship with them, it's like when those thoughts come in or those fears come in, what you resist persists. So if you say, oh, hi, intrusion, or hello, negativity, come on in. Happy to, I see you there, but we're just not going to, I'm not going to give it any energy. When you're leaving a high control religion, all of those things I notice, and I'm very fascinated by the psychology of this. I noticed that things started clearing up. My anxiety started clearing up, like obscure, like aches and pains. The symptoms started going away. And I don't know too much about trauma with regard to how it's related to high control religion. But I do know that when there's like this whole storm of emotions, and meditation seems to be helping that. And one of the meditations you taught me was to actually feel love. Can you describe what that meditation is? Because I think it's really, really important. Even though I'm working on it, for those of you that are watching, I'm still working on remembering to do this, by the way. I'm not an expert. Can you talk about that one in particular?
I'll start by saying what it is, and then talk about why it's useful. What it is essentially is you sitting with yourself, maybe holding yourself, or I like just putting your hand on your heart.
Okay.
And a good way to kind of jumpstart it is to think about somebody or something that you love without reservation. It may be your child, or maybe your puppy dog, or whatever it is, where there's just no conflicting anything. You think about that person, you can feel a little bit of swell in your heart, just their existence. And you connect with that feeling, and then you let go of the reason for the feeling, and you just stay with that feeling. And ideally, you kind of want to be directing it to yourself. But I'm careful when I say directing it, because you don't want to get too caught up in the mind about this. You don't, and this is what we'll often do when it comes to love, is we have this conditional love mindset. I should love myself because I do this. I'm this type of person. I have achieved this. There's this sort of conditional, reason-based love, and what we want to do is try to cultivate an ability to simply just love ourselves as we are, and without having a reason. Again, we usually want to have, we're tempted to want to have to explain why I should love myself, and here are all the reasons, and but we want to try to connect with the idea of you're fine as you are, with all of your imperfections and all of your strengths, and the whole range, and you are deserving of love no matter what. And just cultivating and sitting with that feeling, that becomes the practice, where you're sitting in the feeling, absorbing it, maybe envisioning it and wrapping your whole body, but you're not getting caught up in thinking about it, or explaining, or trying to understand or justify why. And again, that's really useful for former Jehovah's Witnesses, because again, so much of how we think of ourselves in that context is about
Judgment.
Yeah.
And of other people. We become versions of ourselves. I know when I look back on the way that I judged others, or shunned others, or the way that I even thought of other people that I didn't even really know that well, I'm not proud of those things. And that was, I can fully admit I regret and I lament those things. But when you're programmed to judge yourself and other people and behave in ways that you otherwise wouldn't behave, it's pretty sobering to come out of that. It's almost a gift to come out of that, to wake up from that.
Yeah. And you're describing a perfect target for that self-love. You have a feeling of something you did that you wish you hadn't, but you apply the self-love in that having compassion for yourself, that you did at that time what you thought was the right thing to do, because that's what you were told to do. It unfortunately resulted in something that was painful, or not something you want when you look back. But you were doing the best you could, and so that's a perfect opportunity to not judge yourself about that thing. If you did something that you have the potential to correct, or maybe you shunned somebody, and realize that was wrong, maybe reach out to them and say that. But outside of that, let it be okay that life is about making mistakes, and we do the things pretty much in any given moment that we think we need to do, even when it leads us to do the wrong things.
Wow. That's really healing. Can you talk about anger? A lot of people that I do reach out to, they're sitting in that place of anger and they want to come out of it. And there's a lot of YouTubers who that's their brand. They like to do Kingdom Hall crashes, and they're trying to raise awareness in that aspect too. But can you speak about anger and when it's justifiable, and at what point is it toxic for us?
Absolutely. So I think anyone that's spent any time in Reddit or the ExJw community has no trouble finding people that maybe are a little bit on the toxic side of anger. But I want to start by really at first validating you should be angry. And should's a dangerous word, but what I see most often is anger is one of those things that Jehovah's Witnesses are taught is not an acceptable emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It is not becoming of a person. It is just something that should be shoved aside or shoved down. And the thing is, you have a right to be angry. Um, you were robbed of a lot of life. You were robbed of certain developmental milestones that people need to go through to become healthy adults. You are, as people who are leaving, you're put in a position that is extremely difficult and alienating, and one which most people don't have to go through. It's unfair. And so I always start by, when I work with people, of trying to really make space for that and go, yeah, it's okay. And that can be difficult too, because one of the things people struggle with is they want to be angry at something or have something to
Right.
blame.
Right.
And that
Blame.
becomes really tricky because most of us, I think, know that despite all the damage and harm that Jehovah's Witnesses do, for the most part, they mean well. Their intention is good. They think they are doing the right thing. They're doing some terrible things in the name of, they may let their child die for lack of a blood transfusion because they feel like they are ensuring this child will have everlasting life. It is incorrect and terrible how it turns out, but they mean well. So, but it's still important to be able to speak that and to be like, I am angry about this. I am really upset. I am really upset that this organization has cut me off from, from my family. And in a way, it's similar to grieving. Is you spend time being angry and you find ways to talk about it and vent yourself. And also add to, part of this is also helping you secure your new self outside. In order to move on from a traumatic experience, you need to spend some time really cementing in yourself that was wrong and should not have happened. And to really get clear with yourself about that. And similar to what we're talking about with meditation, it could be another type of meditation. We want to be careful. If you find yourself up in your head about it and just perseverating on it and just thinking over and over and over again and you know, just really being up in your head, that may be a good time to practice just sitting with the feeling, trying to disconnect from the story you're telling around it and just feel the heat, feel the burn, find a way to let that energy pass through you as it needs to without getting too caught up in the story. But yeah, I think for most people, it's an important step for leaving is understanding that you have a right to be angry and it's okay to feel angry and it will pass. It'll subside. I think there are some cases like we talked about where people when they leave Jehovah's Witnesses, they feel a lacking of identity. And sometimes this is the thing that they attach to. They feel kind of so, they don't know who they are outside of Jehovah's Witness. So they kind of attach and build a personality around, well, this is who I am. I'm a crusader. And I want to be really careful because I really appreciate the crusaders, even the angry ones. They're doing what they need to do.
And they need to funnel that energy into something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they serve a good purpose too. People who are outspokenly really angry can help validate a lot of people who are feeling a little hesitant about their own anger. And so there is good in there. But all I would just say is to anybody that's sort of feeling like that, don't be afraid that anger is going to take you down the spiral. You're going to become a bitter person. Just allow it to happen. And if you hit a point where you feel like this anger is consuming you, where you're spending way time on these hate websites, and it's hurting you and making you feel bad, well, maybe it's time to reassess and maybe it's time to try some different approaches to work with the anger or to redirect your focus or something like that. But don't be afraid of it. If you become that person and it's not working for you, trust that you'll be able to figure out a way to evolve past that.
We want to empower ourselves when we leave. We want to focus on creating a new life. Can empowerment and anger coexist? Because I believe instead of saying freedom from, freedom to. Freedom from tells us brings us backward. Freedom 2 helps us be a little bit more forward thinking. So how can we empower ourselves? How can people who are leaving the organization empower themselves and kind of coexist with anger? Because anger doesn't just leave us. You said there are tools, obviously, get help, get support from that. But if we want to empower ourselves, wouldn't empowerment look like releasing that anger and not letting it take hold of us anymore? Is that part of it?
I like, instead of releasing in this case, I like to think of more transforming or transmuting. Some people use that term, that anger.
It's a great word,
And I
transform.
guess I'll say two things. One is
Yeah.
I think just like grieving, when given the proper space and validation that it's okay, it tends to lift on its own.
Mhm.
It just tends, it's just something that needs to be felt. And then once it's properly felt and given the attention it needs, it, it's released. But also, like from my own experience, I remember when I left, I was very angry for a while. And I had a chip on my shoulder. And anytime I would encounter somebody that believed in the Bible or Jesus, I would just use all
Really?
of that knowledge that I accumulated through Jehovah's Witnesses to tear them apart,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and really just, yeah, had a chip on my shoulder. And that was an important phase for me to go through. But as I expressed that and made choices based on that anger, I got to places that, this didn't feel right. I remember one conversation I had with someone. I think I kind of brought this girl to tears because I was just calling her out on every Bible scripture that she was using to quote. And she was using this circular reasoning. How do we
Mhm.
know that the Bible is real? Because it comes from God. Well, how do we know it comes from God? Because it says so in the Bible,
Yeah, I love that one. Yeah.
and I
Oh, and
just
I used
held
to
it.
say that. Oy.
But I had enough of those experiences where,
Mhm.
the be- I would never change anybody's mind.
Mhm.
At best, I would leave the person, feeling terrible in some way, and I didn't feel good about that. Anyways, for me, um, I made space for that anger. I worked through it. I recognized that in some ways it was pushing me to become something that I didn't really want to become.
Mm.
And but I will say that, if you want to talk about transmuting, I really don't feel anger at this point. I feel past it, but I do derive a certain amount of satisfaction knowing that I am doing work that is dismantling that religion and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
actively
Uh-huh.
addressing something that I think is problematic. And so I use that to become an action, to put in action. But again, if I was doing it from an angry place, or if I was every time I come and someone comes to see me, I'm like trying to get them to see it my way and get them to see how terrible, I wouldn't be doing much good in the world, you know? Yeah.
And I'm able to operate, I think I'm at the point now where I'm able to operate from a place of empathy. Like
Mm,
I know I'm being shunned. At this point, I'm neither disfellowshipped or disassociated, but I'm still being shunned hardcore. But at the same time, I remember being on the inside and do like I never want to forget where I came from. I never want to forget what that indoctrination feels like. I just don't live there anymore enough to the point where I can empathize with people on the inside. Interestingly, even though I'm being shunned, the very people who've kicked me out of my life needed to be out of my life a long time ago. And
mm,
it kind of did me a favor. And I know that I'm not alone in that mindset. Like that needed to happen. They were not very good people. Sure, I had great experiences. Again, like you said, nothing is all good or all bad, but so much has opened up since, but I allowed myself to see things opening up. And it still creeps up on the occasion. I get nostalgic. My friends and family shunning me. I look at they're still victims in there. That's why I
mm,
started doing this because there's still victims in there and
yeah.
they have to come out. They're on a sinking ship. But that same mentality was how I was when I was on the inside. I got to help people. I got to get
Yeah.
people out of the world and into this religion. So that's
Right.
where
Nothing for
my
real.
energy has kind of the same but different. I'd like to be here as a beacon, like, hey, been there.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's an extra, I think to me, that's a sweet spot. That's a place to be is I'm here. I'm open. I'm so willing to support you and help you if you want it. Um, And you mentioned, developing compassion and empathy, and yes, that's a beautiful place to be. And I think it's also worth noting that when we talk about compassion or empathy or acceptance or forgiveness, all these things, yeah, generally that's the thing we're aiming for. However, it's important to note you can't just jump there.
Right.
If somebody attacks you in some sort of violent way, you can't just go, well, you need to forgive them, and then just swallow all of the things that came from that experience. No, you need to go through your own process. You need to feel that anger. You need to do the things you need to do. So, for example, and again, there's that carryover again, where a lot of people get that they want to rescue Jehovah's Witnesses in the same way Jehovah's Witnesses wanted to rescue the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, yeah, in the long run, it's probably a better, healthier place for you to be, to recognize that you really can't. However, almost everybody, and I would say it's almost essential, needs to try for themselves. It's almost similar to, this happens especially with when people leave and they're trying to convince their families,
Yeah. I was
and
going to ask you about, you thought about that, by the way.
yeah, and that's a key thing that someone needs to go through. Now, I can tell you, if you show it to me and go, they're not going to change their mind, because that's just not how it works. They are designed in such a way, they're programmed to, if they sense even anything that's even remotely critical, they have a wall that goes up, they have plugs that go in their ears, and they shift to an impenetrable thing but me just telling you that is not as good as you having that experience. And so what people need to do usually is go through multiple rounds, and there's this thing where Jehovah's Witnesses speak and act in this way like they're critical thinkers. They like to think of themselves as scholars and people who are well read, and and so you get the sense when you leave, you're like, oh, if I can just present something in a logical, critical way, it's going to open them up. But what you realize is, one, they're not really critical thinkers, and two, that's not the thing that's holding their faith in place. There's something else. There's some need for that person to stay where they are, and they will defend it at all costs. And if you study literature on this, on changing people's minds, this is the other thing, is the more you try to change someone's mind, the more they get mired in their original belief, almost every single time. But again, all of that said, you need to try anyways. You need to go through that, because when you go through that, when you spend so much time articulating that perfect argument and deliver it in the best way, meaning calmly and not too intense, and gently and respectful, and then you still watch it fall flat, that experience is paving the way for the next task you need to do, which is acceptance. And once you've hit your head against that wall enough times, acceptance comes naturally, because I've done all the things. I've done every kind of backflip I can. And it is very clear that this is not something that's going to happen. And that paves way for the grieving and letting go.
It sounds like you're speaking in stages. Would you say that there are stages from waking up to healing, and we want to be functioning, and not just functioning, we want to be productive? And so I know that looks different for everybody, but the stages, are they similar to stages of grief, or can you move through it like it's different stages, and do they have names?
Yeah. I'm hesitating that the stages of grief, I've never really thought to try to align, but I bet there's something there. I'd have to take some time.
I say step one, remove the loaded language.
Hmm.
That does something to your mind, right? So those are when someone is just waking up, and I have these conversations often, Wendy, what's the first thing you did? Well, therapy, number one for me. Number two, losing the loaded language, stop calling it the truth. Start reading, do research, in those stages of number three, give yourself permission to read, things like that, like basic, like kindergarten level steps to healing and moving forward.
Sure.
And of course that comes with therapy. Yes. And it can't happen overnight, but what are some things we can do in our private time when we feel safe to start chomping away at that indoctrination?
Yeah. So I can definitely speak to certain phases, which I'd have to spend more time to figure out if there's an order, because they happen concurrently and in different ways.
I sense a book
Um,
coming from Ryan Lee, PSYD, by the way.
I'm working on it actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Roughly speaking, for the early stages, there's generally a stage in some kind of attack on your faith, let's call it, or some type of something that flicks things, that makes, that disrupts the what you've come to know as the normal established order among your life as a Jehovah's Witness. So there's usually like a, let's call it a trigger, or something that sparks what comes after. So for a lot of people, it's they experience some kind of trauma, they experience some kind of betrayal by the organization. They may, I've heard plenty of experiences where women who have been sexually assaulted or even just had a sexual encounter, and they get publicly reproved or even disfellowshipped, and the man who is involved doesn't. There's some sort of something that makes it very clear. You had that experience. Yeah. I've heard so many stories like this, but there's some sort of failure of the system that is so blatant that makes you feel like there's something wrong here. And a lot of times it just starts with, there's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that. But that usually leads to what else might be wrong. And so the person may start going online. They may venture to start looking at apostate material. And side note there, one of the most common scenarios that happens is like, yeah, I was a Jehovah's Witness for 25 years, and then I sat down at the internet for a half an hour.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the digital age is not doing well for them at all. People are finding info.
Because once they open their mind to just potentially letting in some information, it's just a floodgate. It's just this. Oh, this is I'm in a cult.
Right.
And then there's usually this phase of, I know this, but now what am I going to do about this? Because this is going to change everything. How do I talk about this? And a lot of times there's this phase of discomfort where they are carrying this knowledge, but still, this is the PMO. I always get those physically and mentally out. They're still pretending, but it's now that they're aware of it, it is so uncomfortable, and it is so even more draining. This thing they've done in their whole life, they're so aware of just this faking, and maybe they're even feeling bad. They're trying to hide how they really feel, and this creates cognitive dissonance, and it eventually creates a scenario that is so untenable. Is that the right word? It's not sustainable, that it leads to some kind of action. And then there's another phase for a lot of people where they just start doing little side things. They may just start hanging out with a worldly person, or they might go see a movie they're not supposed to. Little things. And then there's a whole thing around just the coming out process, the way to do it. That pretty much goes a certain way. Most people do the kind of edging in approach. They'll kind of throw some ideas out there, see how their family takes it. Their family becomes concerned. Then they get counseling. They feel a little bit cornered. Then, there's so many stages here, but I'll just start pointing out some other ones. There's okay, now I'm out, and what the hell do I do with myself?
Right. Finding a community, I think, is big.
Number one.
People who leave cults, you tend to go to what we're familiar with, and we're seeking that. So we're susceptible to other cults. There's political cults. There's sports cults. There's wherever the shared interest is. So we're very susceptible to those things. Would you agree to that?
Absolutely.
How do you find a community without falling into these patterns again?
I think it's a good idea to, and this is super important, maybe the most important thing. A couple things I'll say actually. First is, I would highly recommend anyone who's sort of on their way out and hasn't quite left, start making connections now. It's almost like this idea of don't leave the job you have until you have another one lined up.
I love this.
Because when you leave, it's going to be tough. And having 2-3 people that know your situation, support you, and you can spend time with them is going to make a world of difference once that time comes. As far as building a community, I would recommend letting go of the idea of building a community and start by, or it's not even letting go, it's just don't look for a established community to join. find a person you like. And then once you find a person, find another person you like, and build it from scratch. Build an army, if you want to call it, of people that align with your heart and make you feel good, and who you can be yourself and be authentic, and who are understanding and supportive of you, and make that the task. And that in itself, it can be a task.
Yeah, well, because I was very socially awkward with these women who had college degrees and they had these established lives, and I'm like, I have no idea like half the time I don't know what they were talking about, but I'm like, okay, I'm just laughing when they laugh and picking up on social cues, and it was very uncomfortable until I meet one or two women and I'm like, listen, here's why I may be kind of weird and why I say things that may not make sense. And so, yeah, I see what you're saying. Find one or two people that you can really be yourself with, even if you're still in the process of finding out what that even is.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it's really important to keep in mind that what you're experiencing, we do this thing a lot of times as ExJw witnesses, where we experience something where we think we're the only one that's experiencing this. We're the only one that's having trouble connecting with all these people, or we're the only ones playing along when we don't know what we're talking about or whatever. This is one of those, the reality is, for the most part, most people have 2 or 3 people they really like, and they just connect. And then the rest is like, falls in the category of, yeah, they're nice, and you spend a lot of time in conversations you're not particularly interested in. And, it's fine. It's okay. Cocktail party, whatever. But there's a lot of that across everybody. We're very often encountering situations where we're not with the person we're super excited about. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
So
yeah.
It's good to know that, because one, chances are at the beginning, it's going to be that until you find the ones that light you up. And even once you find the ones that light you up, it's still okay to just say, yeah, this is a bit of a superficial conversation, but so what? That's fine. Let's just do that. And maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe they'll say something I didn't expect. That kind of.
Yeah, I wasn't a small talker until I started looking for friends. And now I have found that and I have to give credit to, there's a therapist that I follow on TikTok, Matthias Barker. And I am not into small talk. I'm either avoiding you in the grocery store or I'm burying my soul to you. And here I am on YouTube telling my personal life. It's amazing how I can be that. But he said, don't be so quick to discredit small talk, because it's kind of like dating. Like you're kind of picking friends without bearing your soul, and small talk is not really to be discounted. So I started testing it, and I thought, oh, you know what? I really can do small talk, and it lets me know that people are willing to get to know me as well, and that I have value, even if it is small talk. So yeah,
Totally.
there's a lot said about that. Yeah, I was against it for years. No small talk. You either know me or you don't, and that was very close-minded, very narrow-minded.
Yeah, no, I like to think about it as warm up. Like, nobody really wants to talk about the weather. But we start there because we don't know where to start, and we don't know what kind of commonalities we have. And also, just on a psychological level, we don't realize, but what we're doing is we're testing the waters a little bit. I'm hearing you say something, then I say something. We're getting used to each other's tone of voice. We're getting used to, is this person dominate the conversation, or do they share the space? These little things are sending signals of, is this a person I can open up to? What type of things can I say to this person? So
because in the religion, you're told who your friends are. You live in this jurisdiction. This is your zip code. Here's where your kingdom hall is. These are the people that you're going to be with forever and ever. Amen. And even in school, you're not allowed to be friends with these kids in school. You're going to be friends with. So you really lose that sense of warm up of, what do I believe? Do our values line up with each other? Can we be in the company even if we don't agree on things? And you're not even taught that in the organization.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, Ryan, we talked about so much. I, for one, am grateful, and I know that our audience is grateful too. And where can people find you? How are you accessible? And having therapy with you, how does that work?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's been a pleasure talking to you. This has been great. And thank you for having me on the show. And if anybody's interested in reaching out, the best way to contact me is drryanlee.com. You'll find some information about services I offer, a little bit of information about me, my background, as well as my educational history. And you can also book a free consultation there. I offer free consultation to anybody that's interested in. And yeah, just as a side note, if anybody is interested, they may go on right now. At the moment, I'm pretty booked up until the end of September. However, if you can't find a spot that works for you that's soon enough, feel free to send me a message through the website. Let me know and I can put you on a wait list. Usually once or twice a week, I get a cancellation or something like that. And yeah, and it's a really good opportunity to see if this would be a good fit for you. Generally speaking, we'll spend a little time talking about what particular aspects of being a Jehovah's Witness have kind of, what kind of impact it's had on you. So for example, I could list maybe 10 or 15 things that are very common for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, social anxiety, rebuilding identity, finding out who you are, residual fears, residual guilt. But it's really important, you know, so we spend a little time to figure out what of those items are the ones that are particular to you. You know, generally speaking, I always say, I don't think I've ever encountered anybody who has come to me and said, I had a beautiful, supportive family life, lots of flexibility, but this Jehovah's Witness thing really got me down. You know, it's almost always tied in with your family and childhood experiences and the way that particular experience amplified certain aspects of being a Jehovah's Witness. So, you know, once we establish that a little bit and understand a little bit more of your history, you know, we will move to a point of be able to speak more to how therapy might help you, and you can make a decision about whether to continue.
Okay. And you're virtual?
Yes, I work exclusively. I live in Peru, so all of my meetings are virtual. I work with people from the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Basically any country that speaks English.
Okay. Ryan, thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you all the time. In fact, I'm probably going to make an appointment after we get off this call. But we'll probably have you back on the show if that would be okay.
I would love to, whenever you like.
All right. Well, take care. Thank you so much.
Take care, Wendy.
How awesome was that? Thank you so much for watching the show. If you have a story that you would like to share, please email me at wendyrenee@gmail.com and we will get you on the schedule. And don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Ryan Lee and make an appointment with him to help you navigate your way through this process. That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for watching the show. If you have a story that you would like to share, please email me at wendyrenee@gmail.com and we will get you on the schedule. And don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Ryan Lee and make an appointment with him to help you navigate your way through this process. That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching.